Americans feel uneasy about the economy, according to a closely watched monthly survey from the University of Michigan. The pessimism, driven in part by consumer expectations that inflation will push higher by the end of the year.
When prices go up, sort of by definition, people buy less. And when they buy less and there's less demand, and you see this decline in consumer and investor sentiment.
The University of Michigan, which conducted its consumer sentiment interviews prior to President Trump's announcement of a 90-day pause on some tariffs, says trade war developments have turned consumers more sour on the economy, with the expectation that unemployment will rise as well. Wild swings in the stock market will likely persist too, strategists say, unless there's more certainty around the tariffs.
It's going to be very difficult for the markets to find any stability unless and until we get to a place where some of the negotiations turn into some trade deals.
Both Wall Street and the Federal Reserve will be watching to see how consumer pessimism and market anxiety impact consumer spending, which drives about 70% of the U.S. economic engine.
Volatility is here to stay. The market isn't going directly down, doesn't seem to be going directly up. A lot of ups and downs each day. And that means diversification in your portfolio is more important than ever.
In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa. The University of Michigan said on Friday that its monthly consumer sentiment reading, its look at how consumers feel about the economy, plunged for the month, with Americans not only feeling uneasy about where the economy is right now, but also where it's headed. Americans feel uneasy about the economy, according to a closely watched monthly survey from the University of Michigan. The pessimism, driven in part by consumer expectations that inflation will push higher by the end of the year.
When prices go up, sort of by definition, people buy less. And when they buy less and there's less demand, and you see this decline in consumer and investor sentiment.
The University of Michigan, which conducted its consumer sentiment interviews prior to President Trump's announcement of a 90-day pause on some tariffs, says trade war developments have turned consumers more sour on the economy, with the expectation that unemployment will rise as well. Wild swings in the stock market will likely persist too, strategists say, unless there's more certainty around the tariffs.
It's going to be very difficult for the markets to find any stability unless and until we get to a place where some of the negotiations turn into some trade deals.
Both Wall Street and the Federal Reserve will be watching to see how consumer pessimism and market anxiety impact consumer spending, which drives about 70% of the U.S. economic engine.
Volatility is here to stay. The market isn't going directly down, doesn't seem to be going directly up. A lot of ups and downs each day. And that means diversification in your portfolio is more important than ever.
And looking at the impact of this on consumer households, now that President Trump has hiked the tariff on goods imported from China to at least 145%, updated research by the Budget Lab at Yale estimates President Trump's tariffs will cost the typical middle-class household an extra $3,700 a year. In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa.
Yeah, I'd like to see a deal too, but my point I'm making, there's two stacks, there's two verticals. There's the circle of friendship negotiations with countries like England and the EU and Switzerland and Cambodia, Thailand, Canada, Mexico, where we're going to end up with some reciprocal tariff. That's so obvious that's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take. China's a different stack. I've been saying, and I've just testified in Congress this week, that I'm kind of done with this theft of IP, no access to their courts, the fact that I have to compete with them in capital markets in New York on NASDAQ and on NYSE where they don't even comply with GAAP. Why do we allow this? And so instead of just the rhetoric on tariffs, I don't care about tariffs. I want this behemoth entity, China, which I would like to do business with. I have nothing wrong with the Chinese people. I want to sell to them. But it is such an unbalanced playing field on just IP theft. Let's go in with 400% tariffs, shut down all trade until Xi comes to the table and not just solves on tariffs. That's not enough. I need access to the litigation there. I want him to comply with the rules that he agreed to comply with in 2000 with the World Trade Organization. There's thousands of complaints about China, and nobody ever holds them to account. It's unbelievable what they get away with on our own domestic market. They bankrupt millions of American companies by stealing their IP, and I'm not okay with it anymore because I'm an investor. So I thank the president for having a discussion, but that's not enough. We've got to solve this problem because we're in an economic war with them, and they want to become the world's largest economy by stealing IP to get there. They don't have to pay for what it costs to develop a product that I invest in. They rip off and bring back into this market a 40% discount till they wipe out the originator, the American entrepreneur, with American jobs going to zero because they cheat and they steal. I'm done with it. And I'm just pointing it out, and I'm happy to have this narrative. No, everybody knows the number one destination for the world's capital, more than 50% of it is invested in the United States of America. 49% of all consumption is in the U.S. 26.1% of world GDP is the United States. It is still the number one economy. And now if you're given the opportunity to invest in China or the United States, it's a no-brainer. Every dollar goes to the U.S. And so while the U.S. has the upper hand, and let's remember something, there's a time bomb here. For Trump, it's the midterm elections. But Xi's got a time bomb too. He's got millions of workers in factories. Right now, those products are sitting on ships floating in the ocean because nobody's going to buy them because they don't have a big enough economy to consume them. Only the U.S. can do that. So we've got a little bit of a game here, a little game of chicken, because Xi only gets to stay in power if people have jobs and they can feed their families. He gets a vote every day. If those factory workers have no jobs, they're going to be like a Frankenstein with torches up at the castle. It's going to be brutal, and he knows that. So let's have this dance. Let's go now. Let's settle this now. 400% tomorrow morning to absolutely lock down zero trade until we solve this.
Look, I think when you look at what President Trump is trying to do for our economy, I want to urge people to go back to when he was president, came in 2017. It was some of the more prosperous times that we've had in our country. So I think when President Trump came in, he said, look, I'm awfully tired of all these countries that are ripping us off. I'm going to do something about it. When you engage in that kind of strategy, there's some short-term issues. I think you're seeing some of the countries react and then ultimately lower tariffs and come in for negotiation. Obviously, some countries want to hold the line. But I think that long-term, you need people that are going to step up and who have a bold economic strategy. I can tell you that President Trump's policies overall are very good for West Virginia. I know I was with him the other day at the White House where he's trying to allow West Virginia to mine a lot more coal and make sure we're improving in that area. He knows the importance of American energy independence. And in fact, if we think in terms of inflation and we think in terms of the nature of the economy, it always starts with foundation, affordable, reliable energy. And I know President Trump's focusing on that. So I think overall it's very good. With respect to the tariffs, I just say let's give them some time. I think you're going to see some good things, but I know it's still early in the process. Well, look, I was over at the White House the other day, and a lot of the miners are excited about President Trump's policies. We talked about that because their focus is how we can start to expand the mining and the usage of coal, because they're seeing what China is doing, producing one coal-fired power plant after another. So when President Trump started talking about expanding the use of coal, when I've been working on that here in West Virginia on new policies to advance the use of data centers, that is getting them very excited. So people know that President Trump has their back here in West Virginia and that they're just going to give him the opportunity to change things. Rome wasn't built in a day. I think people in West Virginia know that. And the fact that he came out with such a terrific policy to stimulate energy development, to focus on American energy independence, he's focusing on the core foundational pieces of the economy. Look, I think if you look at what's happened in Washington, D.C. in the swamp over a long period of time, the folks in D.C. gorged on so much taxpayer money. And finally, what you're seeing with President Trump is he's trying to push back on that. And you see some of the Republicans in the Senate doing it. What happened over a prolonged period of time, quite frankly, sometimes from both parties, has been that Washington overspent dramatically. So now you're seeing people step back and try to get their fiscal house in order. So overall, that's the right direction. When it comes to the specifics for West Virginia, we're obviously watching it very closely. I know in West Virginia, we're putting together some strategies to deal with some changes. Ultimately, I would ask the Trump administration to give West Virginia more flexibility so we can implement the benefit the right way, save money, yet still deliver the right type of benefit for our citizens, I think he's going to be open for that. Everything doesn't have to cost a gazillion dollars. We can run government a lot more efficiently. Yeah. I will tell you, we were joking back and forth before the event. And I think at the event, I joked that I was going to be a major renovation project and ask him to be my physical trainer. As someone who used to be an athlete and very, very active, I can acknowledge that I may need to shed a few pounds. And I said, let's take up the challenge. We've started since then the Mountaineer Mile. We're actually planning to announce it leading up to that day. But if we could stimulate more West Virginians to get out, to walk, to get in good shape, I think that's phenomenal. And I think it's terrific that Secretary Kennedy is focusing on the nation's health in a way we haven't seen before. I think it was meant in good fun, and I talked to him about it afterwards, and I can just say that he cares deeply about West Virginia, and I didn't take it. I didn't get offended. I will tell you, I'm the first one to say, let's all work on this together. I'm going to try to lead by example and drop a few pounds, and hopefully you come back in 6 months, you come visit West Virginia, and people start to see a new wave happening with the Mountaineer Mile going all across America.